well. It is the first cut-down day. Dan, Daz Newsome is the recognizable name among those let go. What can we learn about this roster today, if anything?
Well, yeah, the bigger cuts will come a week from now when they've got to get it down from 80 players to 53, and there will be a lot more decisions that need to be made that are more difficult. Right now, the Bears are trying to piece together a team that can go play in Cleveland. It's going to be really interesting to see how much they decide to play anybody on Saturday night in Cleveland. But I think more than anything, Dan, this is another Ryan Pace draft pick that has been shown the door now. I just crunched the numbers on it. Ryan Pace made 46 selections in his time as a general manager. Only 17 remain on the roster and only 5 that were selected before 2020. And so you see the state of the rebuild. You see how drastic it is that they're trying to reshape this roster. And that's another guy out the door today.
I don't know that this is the case, but I think it's always a natural question to ask whenever there's a regime change, Dan, is there a bias towards some of these players because Ryan Pace drafted them?
No, I don't think there's a bias, but I don't think there's any attachment either. And so you use your eyes and you see things through an honest lens, right? And when a guy goes out and performs through the off-season program, right, the OTAs and mini camp, and then into the training camp and the preseason games, and he doesn't produce the way you need him to, then it's just a numbers game and a numbers crunching game and trying to build a roster that you think can get you closer to winning a championship up the road. I think we're all in agreement that they are a long way from being where they need to be in that regard. And so there's going to be some roster mechanics and roster churn that are inevitable through the rest of this year as they try to find guys that can stick with them long term.
And I think it was pretty clear that Daz Newsome earned that designation. We all saw what we saw in the games so far in his performance on the field in the last 2. But when I ask that question, I'm thinking about Tevin Jenkins and what the situation is there.
This is one that in the next 2 weeks better become a lot more crystal clear to everyone, right? We're still kind of in this weird middle ground and not knowing whether the Bears see him as a potential starter for them now at a new position at right guard, or whether they are actively trying to see if anyone else wants him. And this is a complicated situation because in the state that this team is in right now, you would love to be able to have the opportunity of experimenting, right? And seeing, does this work with Tevin? Can he play inside? Can he be effective? Can he sort of clear the hurdles that have been in front of him and become somebody that we can use on our offensive line going forward? The problem with that is if the experimentation gets to a point where it affects the comfort and the confidence of your franchise quarterback, now you've got issues. And that's why here we are now inside of 3 weeks until they take the field for a regular season game. And we have so little stability at the receiver position, at the offensive line position. And now you're telling your second year quarterback, good luck, kid, go get them. We hope you make huge strides here in the second season. And so you can see where the complicating factors are with that.
And it does seem like from the early data points we have with play calling, they know. They wouldn't be working on screens and rolls and waggles if they were a really good blocking team. And maybe getting him outside the ostensible protection of the offensive line is ironically the way to keep him safe and effective.
This is where, Dan, Luke Getsy may become maybe your second most important figure in the Bears organization this season, right, over the next 4 months, with his ability to set Justin up for success in a way that sets the offense up for success. If you have leakage in your protection, if you have an offensive line that isn't quite as sturdy as you want it to be, well, now it's on your offensive designer, your play caller, your guy who's drawing up the plays to do things that create extra protection by A, using the quarterback's strengths, which we know is his ability to get on the move and make some throws, or B, just designing things within your playbook that allow him to be comfortable in there. I'm really going to be fascinated to see what the results are from Luke Getsy in these first 5-6 games of the season and see how adaptable he is, how fluid he is with his philosophies, and how he sets Justin up to be at Justin's best. Because we all know that this season, for all intents and purposes, is about how the Bears can make Justin comfortable, confident, and ultimately productive. And that's going to be Luke's chore above anyone else's.
Based on what you've seen in practice, are there plays that they maybe feel more confident about that they don't want to practice in game scenarios in the preseason that we haven't seen yet? Because I said to Mark Rody yesterday, I feel like we've seen a lot of similar systems and plays, which I like, on the field from the starters so far. But we all know that there's usually more to it than that.
Yeah, there's depth to this playbook that we haven't gotten anywhere near yet. And remember, Justin's played 27 snaps in 2 preseason games. I'm of the belief that he needs to play more on Saturday, given what we talked about just a minute ago, with the lack of timing with his receivers, with the lack of comfort or trust with what's in front of him, that he needs to experience a little bit more action before we get into a regular season game to feel confident that he's going to be able to handle that regular season game with the sort of moxie and grace that you need him to. This playbook will be a work in progress. It will evolve as the players allow it to evolve.
Good. That's how it's supposed to happen, rather than having it all dance magically in the coach's head and have him constantly chasing the next magical play.
That's
There's
optimism.
no question about that. Yeah, there's no question about that. And that's the one thing about Luke that it was notable, even in the spring when you tried to question him on what are sort of the core principles of your system. He just would snap back immediately and say, I don't know yet. I haven't worked with any of these guys. I have to know what the strengths of my players are before I can tell you anything about core principles of this offense. Obviously, as you're referencing there, it's a contrast to Matt Nagy and the previous regime, who seemed to want to run what they wanted to run, no matter how uncomfortable some of their players were running it. And obviously, we saw the results, and it's why we have a whole new regime here in the house at Halas Hall.
Dave Wanstead has talked about knowing Getsy from Pittsburgh and maintains that he knows it's going to be a quarterback-friendly offense. How can you see some of that play out when it comes to potential examples like we've seen already, which I think is just moving the pocket and playing to field strengths?
Well, and here's, Leila, where some of the coaching acumen and coaching points are going to be very critical in the next couple months, because they are trying to get Justin Fields to understand what NFL pocket presence is, right? And it's different for a quarterback who can get out on the move, because sometimes you can be tempted as a quarterback to rely on that too much and give up on the timing of a play quicker than you need to give up on the timing of a play, because you feel like, hey, I can get outside here, use my feet, look for something downfield and try to make a big play that way. And so they are trying to get him to understand the balance of using his strengths while also being patient enough inside there to understand, hey, this play has a rhythm to it, and you've got to feel that shot clock in your head on what this play's rhythm is and make sure that you give it time to develop and evolve the way it's supposed to. And Justin hasn't been great with that through training camp. He hasn't been great with that through the first 2 preseason games. It's going to be a constant emphasis with them in teaching him how to do these things. And you know, I talked to Andrew Janocko last week about teaching a young quarterback how to climb a pocket, right? Because Justin a lot of times has the want to either back up or, you know, sprint out one way or the other when there is room in front of him to climb, use his eyes, find a receiver, make a play. That is something that we're going to have to see in the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season that he's making progress with. Otherwise, you can start to get your finger a little closer to some of those alarm bells.
And scramble may be the best way for receivers to come open. I know that's crazy to think, but outside of, you know, winning that matchup at the line, getting a free release, having it be the right route combination and the right timing of the window, I would bet you right now, Dan, that when we get to the end of this season, I would say the majority, maybe not a massive majority, most of their chunk plays, I would bet you, are going to be on scrambles and or some kind of broken plays.
You know, honestly, we should track that, right? At least for the first month of the season, first 4, 5, 6 games, and track that. You know, what big plays were made because of the design of the playbook, and what were made because they were playing off script and they were in rhythm and they had timing. And that's, again, you know, scramble drill, people think it just turns into a 5th grade recess out there, right? And you just run around, you make things happen. If you practice this thing to a high level, you develop a certain feel as a quarterback with where your receivers are going to be, when they're going to be there, and how to do it properly. And so that's another reason why I just think that they would benefit from more preseason game action against an unfamiliar defense, just to test some of these things out and just check 1, 2, maybe 3 more boxes on Saturday that give everybody in the building a little bit more relaxation as they start to shift their game planning efforts to the 49ers.
I also think those are so important for first-year, second-year quarterbacks, especially because so much of success, a lot of times in college football, your explosive plays come from something like that. So it's a familiar look and something that they feel comfortable with.
Well, it's also a confidence builder, right? When you can get out of trouble and turn a 6-yard sack into a 11-yard gain that moves the chains, right? That changes the feeling, not only for the quarterback, but for everyone on the offense. And it's one thing that Mitch Trubisky never did consistently enough to help unlock and get them out of some of those mental ruts that they were in, because the offense would struggle, and he never stepped outside of the system and made plays on a consistent enough level that said, yeah, that's it. That's what helps keep a drive alive. It helps turn a 3rd and long into a first down that turns into a field goal drive that just gives you a greater sense of ease on the sideline.
Well, they
between
scared
possessions.
him off of it, Dan. They didn't want that because that would ruin what was in Nagy's head.
Also, Mitch lacked a little bit of the playmaking artistry that guys on this level need. I don't disagree with you on that, but I think that it was a combination of him being a little bit too robotic and also just not having that enough in his toolbox to be able to rescue them when they needed him to rescue them.
We saw a play from his last game with Pittsburgh where he was forced to try to do that, and it did not end well.
And we know, too, that there is a humility in a play caller to actually plan for stuff when things don't go well. I like that about Getsy. The fact that they are practicing this, the fact that he's not wedded to principles that supersede his personnel or his situation, that I think that there's a real humility there. To say it's no matter how we get the yards and the points, it doesn't have to be my system, my plays, my name, my playbook. Just get it however we have to get it. I like that.
I think what you're saying is that Luke's basement probably isn't wallpapered in his play sheets, right? Is that
Right.
is that what
and
you're saying?
again, I hate to keep doing this, and stop me if this, and just please stop me if this becomes annoying. But I can't help myself. We've had this experience. We're moving on to a different experience now, and trying to find reasons to believe, and that would be one that's on the positive side of the ledger for me.
Well, here's another one that's an extension of that conversation, because I asked Luke last week how he personally is dealing with the adjustment, right? You come from Green Bay, where you've been working with a 4-time MVP quarterback and a all-pro receiver who does everything that you ask him to do and more. And you never went into these prolonged slumps and these prolonged ruts that challenge you. And now you're taking over a second-year quarterback with a lot of moving parts around him and not a lot of established talent around him. And there's got to be days where he goes home at night and pours an extra stiff drink and rubs his temples and says, man, this is more difficult. But he also said that while he has to balance sort of the urgency to get this thing unlocked with the patience to understand the state that this offense is in, that he's also not going to lower his bar or lower the standard. The standard is the standard, and his willingness and I guess insistence on being demanding is something that's been notable to me, because he's not going to let young players use being young as an excuse. This is how it's supposed to be done. It needs to be done this way for this offense to produce at a high level. And so if you don't do it at that level, then we're going to correct you, and we're going to coach it, and we're going to push you, and we're going to coach it some more. And Justin obviously is a kid that seems very open to being coached hard. And so it's going to be really cool to at least monitor whether that produces the results that everyone wants it to produce.
Is there any news on a timetable yet, or even acknowledgement about Jaquan Brisker, other than the report from Ian Rappaport? And is there any news on Tristan Ebner?
Yeah, no, I reported over the weekend, Leila, that there is some optimism that Jaquan Brisker could be on the practice field in week 1 and capable of playing in that season opener against the 49ers.
I had a nice failed laugh over the optimism, but it was good reporting. Forgive me for not acknowledging that.
And we'll see where that goes. Look, I mean, obviously for a guy that plays that aggressively, if you're playing with some sort of brace or cast or whatever it is on your thumb, you're going to your ball skills are going to be diminished. Your ability to tackle is going to be a little bit lessened, but just the ability to kind of overcome an injury like this and get back on the field as soon as possible will be worth watching, because I think we all saw in that Chiefs game, man, this guy flies around. He's a tone-setting player that you need in a defense like this to really get that fire burning the way it needs to burn with this defense. And so the sooner he gets back, the better. Obviously, I think the Monday of week 1 is one to circle on your calendar. And then if not that, the Wednesday of week 1. And if it drags beyond that, I don't think anyone really expects him to be out more than a game if he doesn't get himself back for the opener.
Ryan Poles 1, Roquan Smith 0 on the scoreboard. And I thought that Ryan Poles won that easily and diplomatically. He did it without having to compromise anything. He did it while making sure the ownership level above him that was directly challenged and invoked didn't say boo, didn't even acknowledge anything. What is the resonating significance of not just the fact that Poles won this negotiation, but the way he did?
Well, time will tell if this was the proper way to handle this, and we'll see how Roquan handles this upcoming season and what he does to produce. But at the very least, Ryan Poles showed an ability to stay wedded to his vision for building this championship roster the way he wants to build it, right? And that means allocating your investments to certain positions. It means seeing the future and not just seeing the present. It means being able to use the tools that you have in your back pocket to stand your ground when you need to stand your ground in negotiations like this. Obviously, the potential complicating factor is that if one of your team leaders feels wronged and that relationship is fractured to a way that has ripple effects beyond that, well, you're going to have to figure out a way to clean that up a little bit and repair relationships and make sure that one fractured relationship doesn't lead to 2 or 3 or 4 up the road in the way that you handle your business. But certainly the Bears understood what they had here. They had Roquan under contract for the remainder of this season and into March. They have the franchise tag in their back pocket, and so they didn't have to get crazy to find a resolution to this. It's just going to be fascinating to see where Roquan takes this, because I think without us knowing the number that he asked for or what the specifics of the offer that the Bears extended to him were, it's hard to cast a verdict on who was more in the wrong. But I get the sense that Roquan wants to be rewarded as one of the game's brightest superstars. The Bears wanted to reward him as a very good player, and that's why we got that canyon that they ultimately weren't able to build a bridge to get across. Do
you think that there's any chance that this causes him to reconsider representing himself?
It certainly didn't sound like that from his comments on Saturday here to us in the media. You know, he doesn't feel like that was a misstep. He's been pretty firm that he wants to have a seat at the negotiating table, that he wants to hear how his employers and bosses ultimately evaluate him honestly. Obviously, we understand what that created, right? It created some acrimony. It created some bad blood here that now they've got to figure out how to work around. But it certainly sounds like Roquan is pretty committed to going through this process himself, and it'll be interesting to see where that leads him next March.
Are we looking at the Chiefs cut downs and looking at the Colts cut downs as we get into cut down season?
Look at them all. Look at the Texans. Look at the Falcons. Look at the Panthers. Right. Look at them all, right? I mean, that's the state of this roster right now. You know, beggars can't be chooser. You can't be picky. You've got needs. You have to be scouring the waiver wires of every other team that is making cuts and figuring out if there's somebody that can come in and at the very least provide competition or depth, right? And so, yeah, I think that we're going to get into the later parts of next week and see some of the roster movement and go, boy, didn't see, those 6 guys who haven't been with the team in training camp suddenly a part of the team's, plans for the start of the regular season. And so it's going to be really fascinating to see where that journey leads us.
Am I reading David Haugh's tease correctly about you two's podcast that your son threw out the first pitch at Wrigley?
Sunday afternoon. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Part of a youth baseball day out at Wrigley. And the dude went out to the mound with 0 nerves and threw a strike to Clark the Cub. He was bitter that it was Clark the Cub and not Wilson Contreras catching him. I told him, hey, you're a few years off from being able to request who your catcher is. Just be happy that you got to go out to the mound. And he insisted on throwing from the major league rubber. So that was another thing that I was really happy to see, and a really cool moment for all of us.
Do you have any advice for Danny Parkins, who's our guest next segment, because he's going to be doing the same thing?
Leila, I would suggest Danny watches the video I posted to Twitter of my son and compares it to the videos that he posted last night on Twitter at his practice sessions and figures something out quick, fast, in a hurry, because Danny might be looking at an uphill climb here for a little bit.
From the rubber, so impressive. Nicely done.
Uncluttered athletic mind is really a sight to behold. That podcast that you mentioned, David Haugh and Dan Weiderer host Take the North, that covers the latest Bears news and storylines every week. They promise to keep you informed with compelling, honest, and responsible analysis of all the latest topics surrounding the Bears. Listen to Take the North on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcast. Dan Weiderer, thank you so much.
You got it, Dan. I have never known what an uncluttered athletic mind looks like, so that was a whole new experience for me to see it in my offspring.
It is amazing when they don't have swing thoughts. They're not constantly burdened by all the evils of the world and man's inhumanity to man, and they don't watch White Sox baseball probably, because that makes you miserable and gives you skin conditions and all that. So it's like I think if you want to keep your mind uncluttered, that's probably the best way to do it.
I'm the guy who stands over a 4-foot putt and has 400 conversations in tongues inside my head before missing it to the right. So that's how I live.
Well played.
Join the club. That's Dan Weiderer. Next up, the man who is going to throw the first pitch for Game 2 of the Cubs doubleheader, your friend and ours, Danny Parkins. Next on the Bernstein and Holmes show with Leila Rahimi, and today on The Score.
Bears fans, game